On June 4, 1943, at Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia, Unteroffizier Herman Butcher clung to the ship's railing as he stepped off the gangplank after a 14-day journey across the Atlantic. His legs were shaky from fatigue, but his eyes were wide with surprise. Through the early morning mist, he saw something that challenged 3 years of Nazi indoctrination. White and black dock workers collaborated effortlessly with machinery that appeared to belong to an era decades ahead. Women in coveralls operated cranes, while children sold newspapers at the gates. No one showed fear or hostility towards their German uniforms. "The Americans are crazy," he muttered to the man behind him. Butcher later chronicled this experience in his memoir, published in Germany in 1952, providing one of the most vivid descriptions of life as a prisoner in America. The Norfolk base covered an expansive 4,300 acres, with docks that stretched endlessly into the distance. Dozens of ships were being loaded and unloaded simultaneously by towering cranes. In just one morning, this single port handled more tonnage than Hamburg's weekly capacity. What left Butcher most impressed was not merely the scale, but the ordinariness of it all. Civilians moved freely around military installations, vendors sold coffee and donuts within sight of warships, and a brass band played popular music at a nearby Bond rally. Among the crowd were 200 veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps, standing in formation on American soil as part of the first major contingent that would grow to 45,000 German prisoners by war's end. In the months ahead, what they would see wasn't just American prosperity. That narrative is well known. Instead, they would encounter something deeply unsettling to a military mindset. A nation at war acting as if it were not. A society so confident in its might that it treated mortal enemies like wayward houseguests, and a populace whose unusual customs and baffling behaviors proved more corrosive to Nazi ideology than any battlefield loss. The processing of prisoners began with what Butcher would later recount in his memoir as the first impossibility. German military doctrine from Poland to France to Africa dictated that POWs were either assets to exploit or liabilities to minimize. Yet here, American officers spoke fluent German, reading out rights and asking about dietary needs according to the rules of war. In June 1943, International Red Cross records indicate that Jewish American personnel, including several sergeants with distinctly Jewish surnames, distributed relief packages while explaining that kosher meals were available for any Jewish prisoners. Some Wehrmacht soldiers laughed nervously, assuming it was mockery. It wasn't. The American military had prepared to meet religious dietary requirements of their enemies. Medical inspections at Norfolk also defied conventional military logic. German POs with injuries received penicillin, a miracle drug scarce in German field hospitals but readily available for American troops. According to Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Matro's July 1943 report, the medical treatment provided to German POs equals or exceeds that given to American soldiers. Prisoners were astounded by the quality of care. African American medical personnel served in integrated units at Norfolk, though not uniformly across the military. One documented case involved the Negro medical technician who drew blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine health screenings. In Germany, such racial interactions were illegal. Here, it was standard procedure. Their most perplexing experience occurred during their first meal. German prisoners were escorted to a mess hall where American sailors were already dining. These two opposing groups, who had been engaged in fierce battles at sea, found themselves sharing the same facility, with Americans eating at one end and Germans at the other, using the same food lines and receiving identical meals. The Americans displayed little interest in their former adversaries, instead engrossed in a radio broadcast of a baseball game, while German prisoners sat just 50 feet away. The 3-day train ride to interior camps brought another level of cognitive dissonance. Unlike the clandestine transport of prisoners in Germany, American authorities made no effort to conceal the POWs. The trains consisted of passenger coaches with cushioned seats rather than boxcars, stopping at regular stations where civilians gathered to watch. At Washington, D.C.'s Union Station in June 1943, hundreds witnessed and documented German prisoners alongside American families, bidding farewell to soldiers heading to training camps. Wives kissed their husbands goodbye publicly while children waved flags. Teenagers enjoyed milkshakes at the station restaurant as enemies and families coexisted on the same platform, divided only by windows and guards who appeared more focused on managing traffic than monitoring prisoners. As the trains traveled through industrial areas that should have been camouflaged or hidden for protection, they instead passed factories with their names displayed in large letters. In Baltimore, the Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant had parking lots full of workers' personal cars visible from the train tracks. Prisoners could count B-26 bombers lined up and ready for delivery. There was no effort to conceal anything or maintain security. American industry operated openly before enemy eyes. Through Pennsylvania, trains passed coal mines and steel mills, operating around the clock. The night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never ceased their operations. Housing for workers consisted of individual homes with gardens rather than barracks, stretching for miles around each industrial site. Electric lights illuminated every home's windows and radio antennas dotted rooftops throughout the area. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as recorded in railroad records from Pennsylvania, German officers observed American workers during shift changes. The scene included men carrying lunchboxes, wearing leather shoes and wristwatches, and driving their own vehicles. According to Butcher's memoirs, one worker discarded a partially eaten apple and took out a fresh one from his lunchbox. This casual disposal of food by an ordinary laborer left the officers in awe, as they had witnessed their soldiers fighting over scraps in Africa. Camp Hearn in Texas opened its doors in December 1942 on a 72,000-acre plot near the town of Hearn in Robertson County. Military records indicate that it was designed to accommodate up to 4,800 German prisoners under conditions superior to what most had experienced as civilians. The construction and operation of the camp are meticulously documented in Army Corps of Engineers records and War Department files at the National Archives. The facilities themselves challenged German perceptions of prisoner treatment. Each wooden barrack featured electric lighting instead of oil lamps, and indoor plumbing with flush toilets and hot water heaters was provided in every building. Prisoners were given individual beds equipped with mattresses, sheets, and blankets rather than straw pallets. With mattress, recreational amenities included ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and libraries. Swiss Inspector Emil Sandstum's August 1943 report noted, "Conditions at Camp Hearn surpass not only the requirements of the Geneva Convention, but also exceed living conditions many of these men knew in Germany." Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Stiles, who spoke German after studying it before the war, addressed the newly arrived prisoners. "Your service record is preserved in military." He explained the camp rules and introduced an unprecedented concept. Prisoners would largely govern themselves within their compounds. They chose representatives, coordinated activities, and managed their schedules within the constraints imposed by military regulations. Enemy captives appeared to be a sign of either vulnerability or a strategic ploy. The camp hospital, which was inspected monthly by the International Red Cross, possessed medical equipment that many German civilian hospitals lacked. This included X-ray machines, surgical facilities, dental chairs, and pharmaceutical supplies, such as the recently introduced wonder drug penicillin. In September 1943, when prisoner Georg Gartner developed appendicitis, he became renowned as the last P to surrender in 1985. He received prompt surgery, performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, with assistance from German camp medical staff. The camp canteen, however, where prisoners could buy various items using script earned through voluntary labor, was a concept that challenged conventional military thinking. Goods available included cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, musical instruments, and art supplies. The War Department permitted these transactions as documented in Quartermaster Corps records, believing that offering small comforts would boost prisoner morale and decrease escape attempts. The notion of enemy prisoners being able to make purchases and choose their own items was puzzling for military officials. December 1943. I did set the employment. In cooperation with the Provost Marshal General's Office, the War Manpower Commission authorized prisoner labor in agriculture and non-military industries. Prisoners earned $0.80 per day in canteen script, equivalent to the base pay for American privates. Detailed records of these work programs are preserved in National Archives Record Group 308. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German POWs worked alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and some African-American ranch hands in cattle operations on a sprawling property that covered 1,895,000 acres, larger than the state of Rhode Island. Ranch records from 1943 to 1945 revealed that this work environment contradicted Nazi racial hierarchy theories due to its racial mixing, although social interactions were limited. A single combine harvester was capable of replacing dozens of workers. Crops were moved using trucks rather than horse-drawn wagons. The ranch utilized small civilian aircraft for surveying cattle herds and locating strays. Ranch foreman Richard Kleber Jr. regarded German POs as temporary workers instead of adversaries, according to employment records at the ranch. In Texas cotton gins across Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, POAs observed processing speeds that surpassed European standards by a significant margin. The Hearn cotton oil mill, which employed P labor from August 1943 until December 1945, processed more cotton in one day than German mills did in an entire month. Despite this high productivity, workers enjoyed regular breaks and full lunches while listening to the radio on the job. This approach of fostering productivity through good treatment rather than harsh discipline contradicted the usual practices of the Wehrmacht. The prisoners were surprised by how openly American farmers discussed politics. Declassified FBI monitoring reports from the 1970s revealed that German POWs were astonished when farmers freely criticized without fear of repercussions. An example occurred near Bryan, Texas, where a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell during a dispute over crop allocation and faced no consequences for his defiance, which would have been met with severe punishment in Nazi Germany. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported supervised Christmas shopping outings for German PSWs, allowing them to witness American teenage culture up close. Young people gathered at drugstore soda fountains with boys and girls together unsupervised. They danced to jukebox music, including jazz and swing genres that Nazi ideology deemed degenerate Negro music. Despite wartime conditions, they dressed in fashionable clothes without militarization of youth culture. American women's behavior especially stunned the prisoners. Women operated trucks for the Hearn cotton oil mill, ran businesses on Main Street, and oversaw male workers at defense plants. At Bryan Army Airfield, part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots WASP program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Military records confirm that WASPs were stationed at Bryan Field from 1943 to 1943 to 1943. Churches across Robertson County invited German prisoners to their services. Mary's Catholic Church document the attendance of German prisoners at these services. The December 24, 1943 issue of the Hearn Democrat reported, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at various churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons were serving overseas. No incidents were reported. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had established sophisticated educational programs at Camp Hearn. Declassified records from Record Group 389 detail this secret re-education program, though prisoners only knew it as voluntary education. The camp library, initially stocked with 500 books donated by Hearn residents, grew to over 5,000 volumes by August 1944. Through the American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program, texts including works by German authors banned in Nazi Germany were made available. For example, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, on works by Jewish authors like Lion Feuchtwanger could be read at Camp Hearn. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now known as Sam Houston State University, offered correspondence courses to prisoners. Records show that between 1944 and 1945, 340 German POWs enrolled in subjects such as English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural science. Professors from the college visited Camp Hearn monthly to conduct lectures and exams. The camp newspaper requires clarification. While Der Ruf was published at Fort Devens, Rhode Island, Camp Hearn prisoners produced their own newspaper called Das Spiegel, which should not be confused with a later German news magazine of the same name. Preserved copies from the Army Heritage and Education Center show an evolution from Nazi propaganda in early 1943 editions to democratic discussions by late 1944. Recently declassified documents from a Special Projects Division outline complex psychological operations. The program categorized prisoners into three groups: anti-Nazis, about 10%, non-political inmates, 75%, or fervent Nazis, 15%. Each category was subjected to distinct treatment aimed at enhancing ideological conversion. Anti-Nazi detainees, identified through rigorous screening processes involving the analysis of correspondence, conversations, and reading materials, were granted additional privileges and educational opportunities. Their influence over non-political prisoners was closely monitored and nurtured. The selection process, devised by military psychologists and German immigrant consultants, involved subtle assessments including the inmates' responses to news of German defeats, their library book selections, participation in educational programs, and social interactions. Major Maxwell McKnight, assistant executive officer, wrote in a November 1944 report preserved at the Hoover Institution, "The transformation rate exceeds expectations," noting that around 60% of non-political prisoners exhibited significant movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education. For example, at the Alco aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where PWs managed scrap materials from September 1943 onwards, daily waste equaled what German aircraft factories could acquire in a week. Documentation shows that PWs were assigned to gather discarded scraps, providing them with first-hand exposure to American industrial abundance. Food processing plants also had a profound effect on the prisoners' perceptions. At Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, corroborated by Milam County historical records and employing PWs from Camp Hearn nearby, perfectly edible produce was regularly discarded due to minor imperfections. Tomatoes that were slightly underripe, corn with irregular kernels, and beans with slight blemishes were routinely thrown away, whereas German civilians faced severe food shortages. Corporal Friedrich Müller wrote in a letter preserved by the Red Cross, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be a treasure in Germany is considered trash here." The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not realizing he was apologizing for an abundance we could barely comprehend. Christmas 1943 at Camp Hearn was extensively documented in local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Hearn, with a population of 2,000 residents, rallied together to ensure enemy prisoners received a proper Christmas celebration. This unusual wartime gesture defied all expectations of how enemies should be treated. On December 23, 1943, the Hearn Democrat published a comprehensive list of donations. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages, while schools contributed handmade cards and decorations. The American Legion Post S-Team 4, comprised of World War I veterans who had fought Germans, donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to their current German adversaries. The Lions Club provided musical instruments, and the Garden Club adorned the camp with holly and evergreen boughs. A photograph featured in the newspaper showcased a Christmas tree standing 30 feet tall in the main compound, decorated with electric lights that remained lit continuously throughout the night. According to quartermaster records, the camp's electrical usage for decorations surpassed what most German villages consumed for all purposes combined, even in peacetime. Local churches organized Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners, and the First Methodist Church Choir learned German carols phonetically. Choir director Mrs. Sarah Patterson, whose son was serving in Italy, led the performance. The emotional impact of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their sons fought Germans abroad left many prisoners deeply moved. Quartermaster records indicate that the Christmas feast menu included roast turkey, £1 per person, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, and California wine for officers. Each prisoner was served approximately 5,000 calories worth of food. In contrast, German civilian rations available at the time provided around 2,000 calories daily. Working in Texas exposed German prisoners to American racial dynamics that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and common perceptions of the United States. The reality portrayed in military documents and local publications was more intricate than what either narrative suggested. African-American soldiers from the 350 Infantry Regiment would occasionally be assigned to guard duty. German prisoners of war influenced by Nazi racial doctrines had to obey orders from Black Americans. Some POs requested transfers rather than accept Negro authority, but their requests were denied by camp officials. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles noted in a December 1943 report, "German prisoner objections to Negro guards are acknowledged and disregarded." These prisoners also encountered the contradictions of segregation. They could dine at Hearn restaurants that refused service to the African-American soldiers guarding them. They could watch movies in theaters where their guards were restricted from sitting in prime seating areas. German enemies enjoyed more social freedom in certain settings than Black Americans, challenging ideological certainties. This paradox is evident in agricultural work sites documented by Farm Security Administration records. German POs worked alongside Mexican-American and African-American laborers. The efficiency of racially mixed work crews when focused on tasks rather than race contradicted Nazi theories about racial purity, being linked to productivity. German prisoners often found themselves outperformed by Black workers, undermining beliefs in racial superiority. 3 well-documented cases illustrate the ideological transformation experienced by some German POWs in America. Herman Butcher arrived at Camp Hearn in June 1943 as a committed Nazi. His memoir describes his gradual ideological collapse due to accumulated observations. Gave gifts to enemy prisoners. When citizens of Hearn gave gifts to enemy prisoners, their kindness was not weakness but strength, the confidence of victors who knew they had already won both the war and the peace that would follow. After his release, Butcher immigrated to America in 1953, became a citizen in 1958, and worked as an engineer for General Motors until retirement. Igor Gartner managed to escape from Camp Deming in New Mexico in September 1945 and lived under the alias Dennis Wiles for 4 decades. Instead of leaving the country, he chose to remain illegally within America's borders, marrying an American woman, raising a family, and working as a tennis instructor in California. It wasn't until 1985 that he voluntarily turned himself in during a television documentary. By then, his time in America had surpassed the duration of his life in Germany. His autobiography, titled Hitler's Last Soldier in America, underscores the profound impact American society can have on individuals. Reinhold Pell also escaped from Camp Washington in Illinois in 1945, driven not by mistreatment, but by a desire to explore and understand American culture. In his memoir, Enemies Are Human, he recounts living illegally in Chicago for 7 years, working in bookstores, and marrying an American woman before surrendering voluntarily in 1953. The FBI investigation found no other legal infractions besides illegal entry. He became a U.S. citizen in 1959 and went on to establish himself as a successful businessman who later sponsored German immigrants. The experiences of German prisoners varied across the more than 500 camps scattered throughout America, yet common themes emerged. Camp Alva in Oklahoma focused on agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records revealed a German PO demonstration farm using American farming techniques. Prisoners learned skills such as mechanical cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development, all of which were instrumental when the prisoners returned to post-war Germany. The camp's agriculture program was so successful that local farmers began hiring prisoner work crews at higher wages, creating competition for available labor. In Camp Concordia, Kansas, a notable art program flourished. German POWs created murals that still adorn the Stone County Courthouse and various buildings in the area. Equipped with musical instruments donated by local communities, the camp orchestra performed concerts for civilian audiences, which were reviewed positively by the local press. The quality of their performances was likened to professional ensembles. Today, works produced by prisoners are part of permanent collections in museums across Kansas. Camp Trinidad in Colorado encountered distinctive difficulties with winter temperatures plummeting to -20 degrees F. Army quartermaster documents indicate that the military supplied German prisoners of war, POWs, with Arctic-grade clothing, insulated barracks, and enhanced caloric rations, reaching up to 4,000 calories per day during winter months. In February 1944, Swiss Inspector André Poncho observed that German POs at Trinidad are receiving better winter provisions than Wehrmacht soldiers on the Eastern Front, according to the prisoners themselves. This transparency was particularly striking for German military personnel, who were astonished by the openness of American information sources. Prisoners had unrestricted access to American newspapers that criticized war efforts and exposed production issues. Strategic failures were openly discussed, contributing to undermining totalitarian ideologies. The Special Projects Division intentionally provided a variety of news sources, understanding that exposure to free media would challenge authoritarian beliefs. Radio broadcasts in recreation halls featured commentary critical of military leadership, while comedians like Bob Hope mocked generals and politicians alike. Journalists such as Edward R. Murrow questioned strategic decisions, and congressional debates on military appropriations were publicly broadcast with dissenting opinions. The 1944 presidential election campaign, observed from the camps, appeared to be a democratic exercise in self-criticism for German military minds. Franklin D. Roosevelt faced a formidable challenge from Thomas E. Dewey during wartime, with Republican critiques of war management making headlines. As the newspapers published opposition viewpoints and political cartoons lampooned the commander-in-chief. Despite this internal discord, the war effort was not only sustained but also intensified. This demonstration of democracy's resilience through open debate rather than suppression fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. International Red Cross inspection reports consistently rated American POW camps as meeting or exceeding Geneva Convention standards, as documented in ICRC archives in Geneva. These impartial evaluations offer vital confirmation of camp conditions. In his thorough report dated August 1944, Inspector Guy Metro noted that American camps meet or exceed treaty requirements across all categories. The food rations are equal to or better than those provided for American military personnel. Medical care is on par with that of American military hospitals. Educational and recreational opportunities surpass many American military training facilities. Specific inspection results from Camp Hearn revealed daily caloric intake ranging between 3,000 and 3,800 calories, well above the Geneva Convention requirement of 2,000 calories per day. Living space per inmate averages at 40 square feet, exceeding the conventionally mandated 27 square feet. Medical staff is provided at a ratio of 1 doctor for every 500 prisoners, surpassing the stipulated rate of 1 doctor per 1,000 prisoners. Recreational activities such as organized sports, libraries, and educational programs are also plentiful. Inspector Emil Sandstum favorably compared American camps to those in Canada, Britain, and Australia, stating that American facilities offer superior conditions. He emphasized that the difference is not merely material but philosophical. Americans regard prisoners as temporarily displaced individuals rather than enemies. Prisoners of state, PS, working in American factories witnessed production methods that profoundly transformed their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lonier Steel Plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where PS from Camp Hearn worked between 1944 and 1945, monthly production surpassed the annual output of the Ruhr Valley before Allied bombing raids. This success was due not only to advanced machinery, but also to a motivated workforce that competed for production bonuses, suggested efficiency improvements, and took pride in their achievements. Production numbers for each shift were tracked and presented similarly to sports scores. Workers wore company pins and utilized their overtime earnings to purchase war bonds. They also painted bomber names on steel intended for military use. At the Texas railroad yards, where PWS loaded materials, German logistics officers were amazed by the coordination. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed PWs at its Smithville yard, where prisoners observed American logistical efficiency firsthand. Trains arrived on schedule with precision, and loading equipment ran without interruption. As Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945, American authorities began preparing prisoners for their return to a war-torn homeland. The documentation within occupation planning records went beyond mere repatriation efforts. In addition to Project Paperclip, which focused on scientists, broader programs were initiated to prepare PWs for rebuilding democratic Germany. Courses in civil administration equipped PWs with the skills needed to manage devastated cities. Agricultural training emphasized feeding starving populations, while medical personnel learned public health techniques aimed at preventing epidemics. Engineers received instruction on infrastructure reconstruction. The Special Projects Division also identified potential democratic leaders among the prisoners and provided them with additional governance and administrative training. This extensive preparation is detailed in Prost-Marshal General reports. By May 1945, enrollment figures showed that 31,000 prisoners were enrolled in vocational training programs, 18,000 studying English, 12,000 participating in agricultural programs, and 8,500 engaged in technical courses, with an additional 2,000 involved in business administration. Concepts related to the future Marshall Plan were also introduced to prisoners before their public announcement. Officials from the State Department made visits to camps to convey America's intentions of rebuilding rather than punishing Germany. This remarkable act of generosity by the victors towards their defeated adversaries effectively dismantled any lingering Nazi beliefs regarding racial conflict and survival of the strongest. The statistics highlight the extent of this transformation. Out of 245,000 German prisoners in American custody, only 222 attempted to escape, accounting for just 0.52%. Of these attempts, only 54 succeeded for over a month, which is merely 0.1% of the total number. And 78 instances of work refusal, or 0.04%, and 78 instances of work refusal, or 0.25%. Conversely, voluntary labor participation reached an impressive 87% among eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities revealed that 74% of former prisoners held positive views about American democracy. When the Marshall Plan was announced, 61% supported receiving aid from it, and 55% favored a German-American alliance. Additionally, 38% expressed an interest in immigrating to America, while 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration records show that approximately 5,000 former prisoners legally moved to the United States during the 1950s. Naturalization records indicate that 92% of them became citizens within their eligible timeframe. Their success in American society was evident through metrics such as employment rates, home ownership, and low crime rates, which surpassed those of other immigrant groups. The impact of these former prisoners on the reconstruction of West Germany is well documented in occupation records and German archives. Many former prisoners held key roles in the new democratic government. 48 became Bundestag members, 312 served as mayors or city councilors, 184 were involved in agricultural modernization programs, 241 taught in reconstituted schools, and 465 managed businesses using American methodologies. Hans Stidnitz, a former prisoner who later became an influential German industrialist, told American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with more than just memories. We had gained knowledge about how democracy operates, the workings of free markets, and the cooperation among diverse peoples. We saw what the future held, and we knew it was achievable." Although Camp Hearn officially closed in December 1945, its legacy endured through the Hearn Heritage League, which preserves correspondence from former prisoners spanning over 4 decades. Annual Christmas cards were sent until the final prisoner's passing in 2001. These letters chronicle a lasting change rather than a fleeting impact. In 1984, marking the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 50 former prisoners of war Camp Hearn returned to Texas for a reunion that was extensively covered by the Hearn Democrat. Former adversaries embraced their former captors, and veterans from the Wehrmacht laid flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann spoke on behalf of the group, stating, "We arrived as enemies, convinced of racial superiority and national destiny. But we left as friends, understanding that democracy's apparent chaos is its strength, and that diversity enriches rather than diminishes unity." Extensive historical documentation exists regarding German POWs in America. Arnold Kramer's 1979 book, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, offers comprehensive coverage, while Judith Gansberg's 1977 work, Stalag USA, analyzes the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's 2010 pipe book, The Barbed Wire College, details educational transformation. These scholarly works based on archives, interviews, and government records, confirm the extent and success. The consensus among historians is that America's treatment of German POWs represents one of history's most effective instances of re-education, through exposure rather than indoctrination. Germans who were interned in the United States between 1943 and 1946 encountered a world they deemed unimaginable, based on their preconceived notions. Each small act of freedom, kindness, and generosity contributed to an ideological shift. They anticipated finding a weak, divided nation, but instead discovered one so confident it could extend mercy even to its enemies. This transformation was not achieved through propaganda, but through the reality they experienced. German prisoners perceived democracy, operating amidst apparent disorder. They noticed racial integration advancing despite segregation. They saw women wielding authority while upholding traditional femininity. They experienced former adversaries transforming into friends through acts of simple humanity. These ordinary scenes, commonplace for Americans, yet revolutionary for individuals steeped in totalitarianism, achieved what military defeat alone could not: a complete ideological shift. The POWs didn't merely observe American strength, they encountered American values firsthand. More than witnessing democracy, they engaged with it actively. America's most significant triumph did not occur on battlefields, but within prison camps, where enemies were converted into advocates through the mere act of observing American life. These sights that astounded them seemed mundane to American eyes, but were extraordinary to those accustomed to tyranny. To German prisoners, these ordinary aspects of American society, chaotic and imperfect, yet free, revealed a stark contrast to their own experiences under totalitarian regimes. These POWs came expecting to confront enemies, only to discover reflections of the better selves they could become. These everyday observations altered not just individual prisoners, but also the course of nations. In the astonished gaze of these German soldiers lay the seeds for pivotal moments in history: the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic rebuilding of Europe. The ordinary sights witnessed by German prisoners in America became the cornerstone of one of history's most remarkable transitions, from enemy to ally.